Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Mr. Speaker, let me return to the Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership. I can report it has already cost the British taxpayer £700 million in order to send just 4 volunteers. Those costs include £290 million payments to Rwanda, chartering flights that never took off, detaining hundreds of people and then releasing them, and paying for more than 1,000 civil servants to work on the scheme. A scheme to send 4 people. It is the most shocking waste of taxpayers' money I have ever seen.
Well, that was the new Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. You're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. So Yvette Cooper there putting a price tag on the previous government's Rwanda scheme. And it's a part of a number of so-called shocking news items that we're set to hear about in the next few weeks. I say so-called, Yuan, because when you look at some of these issues, they're talking about the shocking state of the National Health Service, Wed Streeting ordering an investigation, the new Health Secretary. They're talking about the shocking state of the public finances. The new Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has an upcoming audit. But is it really shocking? The public already knew that these things were bad. You know, you've had the former Conservative Minister, Justine Greening. She used to ask civil servants, apparently, when she arrived at a department to bring out their dead, unveil the bad stuff up front so that you could blame your predecessors. I think you've got to ask whether Labour's just borrowing from that playbook and feigning shock to justify straying from their manifesto later, perhaps. And you've also got to ask whether their plan to deal with immigration is actually plausible. Of course, it ties in with housing, because you've got to control how many people come in if you want to get a handle on there being enough homes, enough provision of public services. And politically, it's crucial that they sort all of this out, because Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage, has made it clear he came for the Tories in the election and now he's coming for Labour.
I think they call it kitchen sinking, don't they, Lizzie? Getting all the bad news out at once and then blaming the previous incumbents for the mess there is to deal with. We've certainly seen it many times before in British politics. I think there's a third question, though, here, which is how long will the public put up with the situation staying as it is? We certainly know that immigration is a very salient issue in many parts of the country. In fact, it was only last December that we spent several episodes of the podcast talking about what seemed like endless Conservative infighting over migration. Have a listen to this, Lizzie.
People will only stop coming here illegally when they know that they cannot stay here and that they will be detained and quickly removed to a safe third country.
The Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion in a matter of months if we introduce yet another bill destined to fail.
What I'm saying, not just to my MPs, but to the entire country, is that I share their frustration. Right? My patience with this has worn thin. Right. One of my 5 priorities at the beginning of the year was to stop the boats, and I'm pleased that we've made progress.
Well, that was all just 7 months ago. So you heard, of course, from the leader of the opposition, as he is now, Rishi Sunak, and also from Suella Braverman and James Cleverly. 2 names I think we're likely to hear more from in the next few days. Nominations open, of course, for the Tory leadership tomorrow.
Yeah, so that's what the politicians say. But let's get the view now from an expert. Peter Walsh is senior researcher at the Migration Observatory, also a departmental lecturer in migration studies at the University of Oxford. Peter, great to have you with us on the Bloomberg UK Politics podcast. You heard there the new Home Secretary Yvette Cooper saying that the Rwanda scheme is going to cost taxpayers £700 million, despite only 4 migrants voluntarily being sent to Kigali. I wonder if we imagine a parallel universe in which the Tories had won the election and the first flights to Rwanda were taking off this week, would that have actually acted as a deterrent?
That was always the big question. I think it would have depended critically on how many people were sent to Rwanda, the regular rhythm of flights that was promised in the Conservative manifesto, because if only a small share of those reaching the UK unlawfully would be sent, then the probability of being sent would be small. And that raises the question as to whether that would really change the calculus. After all, these people are already risking their lives by getting in small boats and crossing the channel. And there were always questions about just how many people realistically could be sent to Rwanda. Of course, now that's not a question. of any concern. We understand that the Rwanda policy is dead and buried. £700 million spent so far is what the Home Secretary said. We knew about 320 million payments to Rwanda, but we have a lot more money here. Apparently, the costs of detention, the costs of supporting people, and the costs of 1,000 or so staff. But I do want to see those sums.
And what about what Labour's proposing? They talked endlessly in the election about a new border force. Will that have any teeth? Do you think there's any chance of that acting as a deterrent?
I think there are real questions about why this will succeed when what the Labour Party has inherited hasn't, because what they inherited was an administration with a dedicated agency to tackle small boat arrivals, the Small Boats Operational Command. It had wide powers of investigation. It was staffed at its senior levels by ex-military personnel. These are all the things that we understand the new border agency will have. What the new border agency has that does seem to be new is counter-terror powers, but at this point, there's a lack of clarity about how they will actually work, especially because so much of the small boats activity, the smuggling activity, takes place outside the UK, beyond UK jurisdiction. So there's a question about actually what impact that will have.
And when you talk about success, Peter, how should we judge it? You know, the media obsesses about the numbers. How are you measuring the government on success?
Well, in part, I mean, we use the government's metrics. And when it comes to small boat arrivals, I think it's fairly clear the numbers would need to go down, and they would need to go down substantially for anyone to claim success here. I mean, it's interesting that, enforcement, it does have an impact. Last year, some 20,000 people were prevented from leaving French shores in small boats bound for the UK, but with 30,000 slipping through the net, it's difficult to imagine that being presented as a success. Now, this is a very difficult challenge that the Labour Party have inherited. So far this year, 15,000 people have reached the UK in small boats. That's more than in 2022 to this point, which was the record year when a total of 46,000 people arrived. And what the Labour government will soon learn are just how great these challenges are. And these are the same challenges that the Labour government know very well. They are that there's about 300 kilometres of viable coastline that these boats can set off from. That's very difficult to police. The senior smuggling figures operate far beyond the jurisdiction of the UK in countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Iran, Iraq. And then the people most directly involved with the smuggling operations on the ground that get the boats to shore, that get migrants there, they operate in small groups. You squash one and another comes up in its place. It's described being like a big game of whack-a-mole. So very, very difficult challenge.
Do you think that there's a mischaracterization of the players here? I mean, I've spoken to people who are involved with trying to sort this issue, and they say that, it's too simple to say that these are baddies who are doing the trafficking, and it's a characterization that works for politicians, but actually you've got someone who's desperate, who knows someone who is, helping a family member to get across to a hopefully better life. And actually, when you get closer to the people who are involved at every stage of this, you realise it's a much more complicated chain of people than the newspapers and tabloid papers perhaps portray it.
Yeah, and some people do not accept the simple characterization of smugglers as being evil. Yes, they are criminal and all that implies. But yet, on the other hand, there are people in the UK now with asylum protection who have been judged by the UK government to be genuine refugees who would not be here had they not paid a smuggler and agents and handlers to get here. So, morally speaking, it perhaps is a little bit more complicated than the one-dimensional view that's commonly presented. But, I'm not here defending criminal smugglers, but this is a point that certain refugee NGOs and other commentators have made.
Peter, to that point, there's been quite a big announcement over the last few days. The government's going to rush through a change to the law which barred anyone from entering the country, anyone who entered the country illegally, from claiming asylum. Just explain what effect that policy had and what changing it will mean.
Yeah, so actually this just added to the backlog of people who were in the UK. Under the old policy, they would be in the UK indefinitely, living in government-provided accommodation in receipt of asylum support payments because we didn't have a country to send them to. So it very much relied on that third safe country, Rwanda, to send people to. But there are always questions about how many people we could realistically send to Rwanda and what would happen to those people who weren't sent to Rwanda, people who would be in the UK indefinitely without any kind of legal status, what Refugee Charities called the perma backlog. And what Labour are essentially saying is we're going to return to processing asylum claims as normal, rather than just leaving people in the UK without status until they can be removed. We're going to return to the system we had before that Illegal Migration Act, and we're going to process those claims. People who are successful, they will stay in the country, so we will have more refugees in the UK as a result. People who are unsuccessful, the government will try to remove those individuals. So that's a really big shift compared with the previous Conservative policy.
Peter, really good to get your thoughts on that. Peter Walsh, Senior Researcher at the Migration Observatory and Departmental Lecturer in Migration Studies at the University of Oxford. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks, Peter. Yuan, I have to say, immigration's been such a toxic subject in British politics, but at the same time, there seems to have been a bit of a return to civility in Westminster. I was listening to Rishi Sunak's maiden speech as opposition leader, and I'd say it was full of grace. So just take a listen to this response to this little slip from Keir Starmer in Parliament from the opposition benches.
In relation to the particular point, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, old habits die hard. The point that the Leader of the Opposition for me.
I'd say that was civil laughter, right?
Yeah, it's been rather nice, hasn't it? And let's hope it lasts through the Tory leadership contest. And another big test tomorrow, which we'll be covering, of course, Prime Minister's questions.
Well, you'll have to tune in for that. But that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Walcock and our audio engineer was Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.